talk show that cuts to the truth, no matter how painful it might be, and no BS. Citizen Smith, Citizen Smith, Citizen Smith.
Here's a man who would not take it anymore. A man who stood up against the scum, the dogs, the filth. Here is someone who stood up.
It's time for Citizen Smith.
How are you this morning? I'm very excited today on my show because I'm talking to a woman who I greatly admire. She is an adventurer, a filmmaker, and she completed an epic journey of 15,534 miles, a Canadian trek on the Trans-Canada Trail, the first human being of modern times to do so. Her name is Dianne Whelan, and she joins me today on the show from her support vehicle. Shall we call it an RV? Dianne, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ken. How you doing?
Your hair is very long now compared to what it was when you started the journey 6 years ago.
I know, Ken. I feel like a little bit of the Sasquatch, but the taming has not begun yet. Reentry comes with a little bit of adjustment time. So I'm in desperate need of a haircut, but I guess through COVID, a lot of people could say the same. I saw a lot of people, taking matters into their own hands and cutting their own hair over the last year and a half. So I think I'm in good company.
Well, I'm excited to see you. First of all, safe and sound. This is no easy trek that you took on. And, you started it not as a young chickie, but a 50-year-old adult woman. So physically, you're just showing women and people of 50 plus that you can do anything still physically.
Absolutely. It's really all just about the pace. I can go out there to try to prove how strong I am or for some sort of athletic achievement. I went out there to make a beautiful film and to have an incredible experience. I like to joke with people. I didn't know I'd have a headwind the whole way, Ken, because I left from the east to come back to the west. And yeah, I literally had a headwind every day for 6 years. But I never asked myself before I left, what's the easiest way to do the longest trail in the world? I asked myself, what's the most meaningful way? And following the sun back home was just that. And, I never thought it was going to take me 6 years, but I had to surrender to that.
6 years.
Right?
That's such a long time to contribute to one mission. Not only was this a trek that you took on, but it's also a documentary film that you took on. So you have to stay focused on both, doing the trek and getting the footage you need.
That's right, Ken. And I don't know which one was harder, frankly. I think just making the film would have been challenging enough. But yes, absolutely. Doing the trail and filming it definitely raised the bar on the challenge for sure.
Keeping equipment safe, you must have had problems. Did you drop a camera in the water on a kayaking trip, or what happened?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I was always in a canoe. I went old school, so it's debatable. I haven't sat there and counted every kilometer I've done on my GPS yet. That's that'll come. But for me, I never measured my journey, in numbers quantitatively. It was like once you surrender to it, you just surrender. It didn't matter how many kilometers I did in a day. But I'm guessing I probably paddled somewhere in the 5,000, 6,000 mile range. And I used a canoe the whole way when I did the paddling section, because it is a water and land trail. So I did both on this journey. Yeah.
And as to the equipment, I mean, how did you preserve it during this trip? Did you have problems trying to, maintain and service your cameras? You had a drone flying around. I saw in your YouTube short video.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good questions, Ken. I mean, there's definitely a few GoPros out there. One's on the bottom of Lake Superior, and one is high up in the Rocky Mountains somewhere. I'm thinking maybe a marmot or a bear is having a really good time. Yeah, so there was a few GoPros lost, but actually I'm happy to say that the bulk of my equipment is still with me. And that I never lost my main camera, which is a Panasonic DSLR. I tried to film the whole thing in 4K. So I would have the highest quality in the can that I could get. And so there were definitely some challenges, but overall, looking after the equipment is kind of like looking after yourself. You have to slow down and take that time out. So, and I knew, I was out there to make a film. So that was the whole point. Well, there was many reasons for this journey, obviously some very deep and personal ones as well, but that was my job out there. So I looked after my gear, and surprisingly enough, it's still with me here 6 years later.
That's fantastic. Well done. Also, you had some support though along the way. People would meet up with you and probably help with the filming and
Yeah,
grab footage, edit, take it away. I know you
yeah,
spent some time in tents with a friend of yours I saw in the video. Who was she?
yeah. Oh, the one in the trailer is my buddy Janika. She's a buddy from back home. She came out 3 or 4 times for a few weeks to help me out. There was also an artist from the East Coast named Dianne Whelan, who for the first 4 years came out, and she came originally. She was just going to film for 4 days, and when I began the journey in Newfoundland, and I think she just realized, wow, this woman is going to need some help. Anyway, she kept coming out when she could for 4 years to help resupply or help me make the transition from snowshoeing in the winter to canoeing to backpacking to my mountain bike, whatever was required. And then my partner, I've been in, hard to believe, but I actually began a relationship on this journey a few years ago with a woman that I've known for a long, long, long time. And for the last year and a half during COVID, she gave up, her life and her home and moved into this. It's a Ford van, and that's it's got solar panels, so she could live off grid and find me. Basically, she did things with this transit van that, I mean, like, I can't believe she took a non-off-road vehicle very much off-road. But her day job is an engineer on 737s. So she's a pretty strong lady, and she came through for me for sure. I like to tell everybody, Ken, that the currency of 500 days in the wild has been human kindness and human love.
Mm. You also connected a lot with the Indigenous people during this trip.
I most certainly did. In fact, it was part of the inspiration for doing this journey for me. I think Canadians, like Americans, are beginning to realize that the story began way before Columbus, in the States, and certainly way before Confederation in Canada. I mean, that people have been living in North America now for at least 10,000 years. And so I wanted to. I'm very proud of of living in Canada, as I'm sure you are about being in the States. There's so much to celebrate, but it is time to revisit our stories. History is his story, and it's time. It's time to rewrite that and search for a more inclusive story. Now, I think as we move forward into the future.
So this journey was, as you mentioned a lot, one of solitude as well.
Yeah.
So you did go through mostly wilderness and experience the wild lands of Canada, as well as finding yourself as an individual in solitary living. Describe how you evolved through that period.
Again, really good question, Ken. I like to say that solitude reveals what a mirror cannot. At first, I had to combat a lot of personal fear as a woman alone out in the wilderness. It's pretty loaded, I think. Even just walking alone in a city can be loaded for a lot of women. So I had to overcome that fear. I'd like to say that a lot of the fear that I had was fear that I brought in a little suitcase with me. It wasn't actually based on reality of anything that I encountered. In fact, in the 6 years I was out there, although I was afraid when I met certain people at certain times, it it they were all I met was kindness and from people. So I was very lucky that way. Um, but the other thing that happened to me, Ken, after being out there, I would say after the first year, was a pretty profound shift in the way I was connecting. What was at first felt like solitude and being alone eventually turned into feeling more connected to life than I ever have in my entire life. And that's with no people around. And I think what really dawned on me is that, we forget when we live in cities, we live in environments that we created. When we return to spending time in nature, we return to a place that created us. And humans are just 0.001% of all life on Earth. And when you're out there alone, you begin to really, really connect to that other 99.99% of life. And so with that, eliminated the idea that I ever was alone out there.
So now you return to humanity,
Mm,
society. Of course, the pandemic broke out during your trip.
mhm.
Let's backtrack to that point because when did you realize it on your trip that it broke out, and how much did it impact? Given you were by yourself in the wilderness, you probably didn't feel it too much.
Well, I mean, on one level, I didn't for sure, Ken. Like you mentioned earlier in the conversation, in the first 4 years, I did try to spend time in Indigenous communities, listening and learning and witnessing. And in fact, this journey was also a journey to find hope. Like in 2015, when I embarked on it, um, I had lost my hope. I felt that we used to live in a society, and now we live in an economy. And so I went looking for lost wisdom and hope. And that's why I called it a pilgrimage. My grandmother went on a pilgrimage in the 30s to a place that she considered sacred, which was a church. For me, that's not where I find a concept of the sacred. Where I feel a concept of the sacred is in nature, because what I believe is sacred is what is essential for survival. So, what I consider to be sacred is water, clean air, and yeah, clean food and the earth. So, that's why I went on this ecological pilgrimage to find hope. And I
Mm.
found that hope in those Indigenous communities that I was able to spend time in, because they still live with the earth, not on it. And I believe that if we could combine some of those ideas, like thinking about 7 generations when we're making decisions, think of how profound that would be in the boardroom if people actually had to think about 7 generations when they were plotting out what they wanted to do. And that's not to say that I'm against any form of industry. Of course, we all need wood and we all need all kinds of things, but it is all about process, how we go about doing these things. And I do believe there are sustainable ways. If we can put a rover on Mars, surely we can find a clean way of making paper. So I went out looking for that wisdom. I found a lot of those ideas in Indigenous communities. But since COVID, bringing it back to your question, Ken, that's what changed. I couldn't go into those communities anymore. I really couldn't go into any communities. And as much as this trail incorporates a lot of wilderness, it also goes through 1,000 communities and cities. That's what makes it rather intriguing to a lot of people. And it also serves to be able to constantly resupply or recharge or do whatever you want. So it was a real blend. I had months of wilderness and being alone, and then I also had engagement. When COVID hit, I thought I might have to stop the journey, because how was I going to resupply if I couldn't go into communities? And so at that point, that's when the support vehicle came into the picture. The project never had a support vehicle. I was out there just kind of figuring it out day by day, and it always worked out. When you're patient enough, what you need is what someone said, within 10 feet of you. But
Mhm.
certainly, like again, like once COVID hit, the reason why Louisa moved into this van was she could find me and resupply me. The van could carry months worth of supplies, and she could find where the trail would intercept a dirt road and meet me there, and it would be an opportunity to recharge batteries for the and get some food and some human connection. So that's how it changed. What didn't change was the connection to nature. That nature didn't get COVID. The birds didn't get COVID. The deer didn't get COVID. The trees don't have COVID. So when you're out there, you are noticing a change, and that change, of course, is climate change. I've never, known in my life for BC to hit 120 degrees Fahrenheit. But in fact, in the last, few months before finishing this journey, I was on trails in 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The amount of forest fires that are burning now here and in Oregon and elsewhere. We've always had fires, but certainly there seems to be some kind of tipping point that's happening right now. So my connection to nature didn't change. And, those impacts on our environment that we're all experiencing collectively, of course, I also experience. But by not being in cities, I wasn't, I obviously missed the other part of I guess what we shared when I left, the isolation component seemed like such a strange thing for a person to embark on. And yet, as I finish, we all have collectively now experienced that kind of isolation, I think. So, yeah, it's been a very interesting experience, and it definitely changed the journey on some regards. But in another way, I never had more support on the journey than I did during COVID.
Psychologically, how did you feel during the trip? You must have some ups and downs, peaks and valleys. Did you suffer any depression because of certain situations and hardship? And did you ever feel like you wanted to quit?
I wouldn't say, I think I've suffered more from depression before I went on the journey than I ever did out there. Like I said, that sense of the world not making sense anymore can be quite overwhelming. I mean, just you're trying to understand, like, okay, why aren't we dealing with survival? The machine just keeps on going. So I think that kind of reflection and this disconnection from the future, as humans, you and I can trace our origins back to the beginning of humanity. We can't, because we all have this collective amnesia about our past, but we could, if we could remember. And so too do we have a connection, obviously, to the unborn. And again, that was something I really sat with in Indigenous communities, is their connection to the continuum and their sense of responsibility, their honoring of ancestors, and their realization that they are tomorrow's ancestors. In fact, we all are tomorrow's ancestors. There was just more cognizance and discussion of that in those communities. And so, yeah, I would say that because the journey was a place that I found hope and human wisdom, that it actually healed the depression and anxiety for me, as did all that time in nature. So I didn't really suffer from that. I never, by letting go of the schedule, when I left on day one, I had this schedule, Ken, and I thought that I would do this journey, obviously, in 500 days. And on day 10, I realized, D, you haven't even you haven't reached the end of what you thought you could do in one day, and you're on 10 days. So it's time for a personal reckoning here. Reality check 101. And so I actually lit a small fire and burned my schedule. And I sat with, why are you out here? Like, what is important? And I just reminded myself, you're out. It's not about the fastest way. It's about the most meaningful way. You're out here as an artist, and slow it down. So after day 10, I stopped counting how many kilometers I did in a day. I just got up, I ate breakfast, did some self-care, packed my equipment, packed my tent, went on the trail. And maybe that day I would do 5 miles, or maybe that day I would do 30. It would all depend on what happened. If I saw 3 moose in a river, I'd be pretty darn excited, throw everything down, grab my camera, throw my body on the ground, and start filming the moose, and I might be there for 4 hours, and I didn't know that 10 minutes before I arrived there. So I just allowed myself to surrender to the experience, and really honored the fact that I'm a fragile being out there, and nature and the wind and all of it is so much more powerful than me. And so I tried to work with nature. So, for instance, on a paddle, if I got up on the shores of Lake Superior and there were 4 or 5 foot swells, I didn't go anywhere. And at times I would wait a week to resume my paddle, and because I knew that if something went wrong, there was nobody out there to rescue me, that I would have to rescue myself. So it just really changed who I was. I think I was more of a type A kind of, go out there and seize it kind of person. And I just had to surrender to the fact that I am fragile, as we all are, and that I needed to work with and not against. And it was never about conquering anything. There was no conquering the trail, no conquering nature. If there was anything I was conquering, it was myself and my own fears.
Mhm.
And so, and as far as ever wanting to quit, again, no. I mean, to make this journey, a lot of people are like, how the hell did you finance this? And to make this journey, I gave up all my bills. Before I left, I wrote down every single monthly payment I had in my life, and I proceeded to get myself out of those monthly commitments. And so all I paid for monthly, I paid every 6 months, I paid for a satellite phone, service, which was a couple $100. And then I paid for my cell phone. And then I paid for food. And
Mm.
so that's how I managed to stay alive out there and make this journey. And I like to remind people, we're not what we say we want to do. We all are what we're willing to suffer for. And I was willing to suffer to make this film and to do this journey.
The journey for 6 years, did you get sick at all, or did you find your health was even better being out in the wilderness, and did you have any injuries?
I found my health was better out there. I never did get sick. No, we get sick from
6
each other.
years, never sick.
I know, I'm really lucky, and Ken, absolutely no serious injuries. Lots of bruises, lots of scrapes, couple of pokes here and there, and but no serious injuries. I mean, I'm 56 now, so those last 2 years getting out of the tent, I felt like the Tin Man in need of some oil. But once I got moving, things things started. Things would work themselves out. But yeah, no, and again, I think I attribute my safety and my health to self-care. I like to joke, I wasn't really that great at self-care before this journey. And I don't think normally people would go on an extreme adventure to learn self-care, but I did because I had to. And even as I was saying that reality moment of realizing I had to burn my schedule and really just reset the tone for this journey. I like to say that was the day I took the rabbit suit off and I put the turtle shell on,
Mhm,
because the
mhm.
rabbit doesn't make it. The rabbit burns itself out in that old wise story of the turtle and the hare. But the turtle makes it because slow and easy, right? So
Yeah.
I thought, that little childhood fable is the medicine I need right now to listen to, because that's the only way I'm going to make this safely. And that is move slow, really, self care. And it's not about ego, it's about connection and meaning.
You went from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. You went up and down to the Arctic. The map shows your entire trek, which we might put on the screen to show. And of course, you went through a lot of wilderness, which means you encountered a lot of animals, including bears, which could probably be the most dangerous of all the animals, or a moose. Any close encounters you'd like to share? And did
Well,
you
there
capture
were
it on film?
yeah, actually, there's one for sure that we got on film up in the high Arctic. So I'd like to just preface this though, Ken, by saying that I met one of the most profound and meaningful times for me was when an animal would trust me, whether it was a bird or a rabbit or a grouse or a moose or deer in a fawn or bear or a lynx. Those moments when the animals knew, and I think it's because of resonance. Animals can feel fear and they can feel anger and they can feel aggression. And I think they also can feel when they're not, when you're not carrying those kinds of things. In fact, what you're carrying is an awe and a respect. And so those moments were far more frequent. I would say that I saw over 100 bears on my journey, and I probably filmed, I don't know, a solid dozen of them anyway. And I had in that time um, only two scary moments with a bear. One was in the high Arctic. I'll share that one. And it was on the Mackenzie River going towards the Arctic Ocean. That I guess it's 4,000 kilometers. So I'm not sure how many miles that would be. Probably about what, 2,500 miles or something, or maybe 3,000 miles. I was with my partner Louisa. She joined me on that section. She just and it turned out that was very wise not to do that section alone. There were rapids, and there was an 8-mile portage, which means you're doing 64 miles of hiking, because each portage, you'd have to go back and forth and back and forth to get all your gear over there, right? So a portage that's 8 miles could take a few days. So in any case, we were well past the halfway mark. In fact, I think we were close to the Arctic Circle at this point. And bing, I get a message on my cell phone, and it's from my producer, a woman, Betsy Carson, and she says, "Dee, I hope you get this message. a man was just eaten. He was just taken out of his tent in the middle of the night on the shore of the river, also canoeing, and was just eaten by this grizzly bear. And at that point, the vibration shifted. All of a sudden, I was like, both Louisa and I were pretty fair. We're afraid.
Yeah.
Before we,
Man-eating deer on the path.
right? I mean, the fact is, in the 5 months that we were paddling, we never saw another canoe or we never saw a kayak, but we heard stories. We knew there was a man from France named Thomas who was 30 years old that at one point was 2 days behind on Great Slave Lake. And then he drowned and died. And then we heard that there was a couple from France that were just doing the Mackenzie River, a biologist and a musician named Julian, and that they were just a few days ahead of us. And then we heard that Julian got eaten by a grizzly bear. And we were going to probably be the next people that would be going through that section and perhaps even camping. We couldn't get the intel on where exactly that attack had occurred. So before we embarked on the northern section up to the high Arctic, Louisa really said, we got to get our gun license. And I'm like, whoa, I haven't carried anything on this journey and I don't want to, I don't want to invite those kind of situations in by carrying a gun. And she's like, well, we don't have to get one, but I think we really should get our license so that if we do want to get one at some point of time, we're legally allowed to do so. So it was only a 2-day course. And I thought, well, can't hurt, right? So we went and got our licenses. So after we heard about this man being killed by the grizzly bear, we actually got a 12 gauge sent up to Hay River, which is on the Great Slave Lake, and then it brought out to us, and we started traveling with that. So it was about 2 weeks after this man had been, poor Julian had been killed, that we were camped on a small island. Maybe just a couple hundred miles at this point from the Arctic Ocean. And it was early in the morning and Louisa was making coffee. And all of a sudden she said, there's a bear, it's a bear coming into our camp right now. And it's not friendly. So I said, well, grab the gun, and I immediately started running the GoPro and scrambling around trying to find my clothes, because I know you're in the Arctic Circle. We're not going to be sprinting away from the bear naked in the Arctic Circle. So I managed to get myself together, got the camera rolling, got outside, and the bear was definitely coming towards camp. And I said, you're going to have to fire a warning shot. So Louisa fired a bird shot, which is the first two, and this is 6 shots in the chamber. And the first 2 we had, one was a bird shot, and one was a buck shot, and then it was the real thing kind of thing. So she fired the bird shot, and the bear just kept coming. And at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm really glad we're not waiting for this bear to get 6 feet away. So we're using bear spray, because clearly it wasn't coming to say hi. It was coming for breakfast. And I think we were on the menu. So
You think it was the bear that killed the man?
I don't know. We called the RCMP on the satellite phone to find out. That's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police for Americans. I had to find out if they had gotten the bear or if anybody knew any information. And all they said was, just do you have a gun?
Yeah.
Keep it loaded is basically their advice. So we don't know for sure if that was the one or not. I'm going to say no, because we were a ways away, but they have large regions. So who's to say, right?
It was aggressive, which is unusual, to come into a camp like that. So you got the gun, you fired 2 shots. How did it end?
Okay, well, the bear didn't stop after the first shot, but the bear sat down after the second shot and watched us from about 50 feet away. And at that point, Louisa just kept the gun pointed, and I just packed up camp as fast as I could. Louisa was like, let's just leave. And I'm like, no, man, we're in the Arctic. We have to have our gear, or like we might survive the bear, but we'll die of hypothermia. So we pack all the gear, we get in the canoe, and we take off, and left the bear behind. And so it had a good ending. The most remarkable part of the story for me in hindsight was that once we got on the boat, like I said, Louisa was making coffee, right? So when we got on the canoe, somehow everything got packed. And once we were 15 minutes away, I look at her and she looks at me, and we're both holding full cups of coffee. So somehow, through all of that fear, we both prioritized not leaving our coffee, dropping our coffee, or losing any coffee from our mugs. So there's the happy ending to that story. Yeah, so that was the first one. And the second one was a bear bluff that I had only about 4 months ago, where a bear just came charging at me, and it was a bluff charge. But yeah, it definitely left my knees shaking, and I never ever have to have that experience again.
Yeah, your frame's frozen a little bit, but we still hear your voice okay, though. So,
Okay.
very good. Well, that was a hell of a story.
Sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
willing I'm willing to bet that was the same beer. I don't know. It just
Okay.
sounds like an aggressive beer that knew camps, was on the lookout for people, and sometimes it's better to be lucky and carry a shotgun. And
Well,
in
in
this
that
case,
case,
that shotgun might have saved your life.
yeah, it's not Disneyland, so yeah, especially in the high Arctic, where we're more animals than there are people. So
Yeah. What I find interesting is you as a filmmaker, you kept the camera rolling even though your life was in danger. Let's make sure we get this in on sh let's get this shot though.
yeah, right. I don't know how, that was most times when I was traveling solo. Those are the regrettable moments, that the most challenging moments that you really want to capture on film are not on film, because I had to put my survival in front of the camera, right? So that was actually one of the few instances, because I was traveling with someone else who could hold the gun. I was actually able to film some of it. Yeah.
So you're left with all this film footage from 6 years.
Yep.
Now it's time to edit and get the documentary series ready because 'cause you're gonna run it in subsequent you're gonna do it 1 year in 2022 and 2023, I think I read?
Right now, Ken, my intention is to cut one feature and then a limited series, and also to write a book. Just like my other films, I've up on Everest and up near the North Pole. I always write books about my journeys as well as make documentaries about them, and they're different. They're the same, and yet they're also very different. So what I'm sitting with now is, do I write the book first or make the film first?
Mm.
As of right now, I'm already starting to collate. I have over 100 journals that I've written in, and I'm starting to work with an assistant editor. So both processes are initiated already, just even in the first 2 weeks off the trail. And being an independent filmmaker, I have to apply for grants and do all kinds of things. There's a lot more to it than there's a lot of work still for Dee to do here, and I'll be sitting with the footage and sitting with 500 Days in the Wild probably for the next 2 to 3 years of my life. But
Mm.
yeah,
And the
that's
book, maybe we'll finish in a year? 6
sorry.
months? The book,
The
when do you think you'll have that
I
finished?
think maybe in a year. I mean, it would be the ideal scenario would be to be out by next October. But again, I'm still doing the dance and trying to find a publisher. I'm working with a literary agent right now, and we're
I'm
having
sure you'll find somebody to publish
a
this
good.
story.
Thanks. I like your optimism. Thank you, Ken.
Well, I mean, hey, you're the first person to do this, right?
I
Nobody's
am the
done
first
the
person.
trek.
Yeah. I'm the first person to do the land trails and the water trails of the longest trail in the world, and the first woman to do the trail. There was a man named Dana Meese. He's still alive, so I shouldn't say was. There is a man named Dana Meese here in Canada who walked the whole thing over a period of 10 years. And there's another woman out there right in the Yukon right now, Mel Vogel, who's also trying to walk the whole thing. And so I like to say that there'll probably be many firsts. I'm very honored to be the first person to do the land and water trails, and to be the first woman to do this trail. But after filming on Everest, I realized, oh my God, there's so many firsts, right? Oh, I'm the first from this country. I'm the first from that country. I'm the first. And, it stops losing its impact after a while. I think what will be remembered by me isn't so much that as it is, like I said, how meaningful the journey was, and just how the kindness that I encountered on my journey. But yeah, it's definitely an honor to be the first person at the same time.
So at the end of 6 years of this wilderness travel on the Trans-Canada Trail, now that you're back into society, where do you think you fit in? Are you going to stay in a city? Are you gonna find a quiet little cabin in the wilderness? Where does Dianne Whelan go from here?
Definitely quiet little cabin in the wilderness. No question about that. Reentry is, I mean, there's so much to celebrate about human culture and human society. But even before I went on this journey, I was a person who lived in the wilderness in a tiny cabin. So that's definitely where I'll return to. It's just, it's a place where I just feel more at home, where there's more animals than there are people. But it's also really just to do the writing and to drop into the creativity. The quiet and the silence complements that very well for me. So that's where I'm headed.
Excellent. And when you head this way to Portland, you let me know. I'll show
I
you the
will.
town. I'll take you
Right
out for a
on.
nice pizza or even a steak, and you and your friend, because you probably could use some food at this point anyway. I'm sure you'll
I
enjoy some great meals over the next few months.
Yeah, right. No, there's definitely not. Yeah, no dried food on the menu right now. And no, what I've hear you've got an amazing kick butt ice cream place there called Voodoo too that I want to check out.
Well, but donuts. It's famous for its
Donuts.
donuts.
That's right.
Voodoo
Donuts. Voodoo
donuts.
donuts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll take you off for Voodoo donuts, and you
Okay.
can enjoy that. Get some calories in your body. You probably lost a lot of weight in this trip.
That came and went, in the winter, I would just really bulk up because adding 10 pounds was like wearing another two thick wool sweaters. So, the paddling, I would lose a lot of weight because I would be, paddling 10 or 11 hours a day and you couldn't replace as many calories as I was using. But in the winter months when the days are shorter, the distances that you can cover are also shorter. And so it was easier for me to get the number of calories. So many dark hours, right? You only have 8 hours of light in the winter months. So there's a lot more time in camp, at camp, and so a lot more time for cooking and, feeding
Yeah, I
yourself.
read that New York Times article, and it was
Yeah.
interesting that you met the elder woman of a tribe,
Yeah.
a native tribe, and she told you, she gave you a little advice. In the wintertime, that's when you stop and
Yeah.
you feed yourself and wait out the winter and then get back to, the outdoors
Yeah.
and working.
Yeah, her name was Dianne Otter Eyes Reed. She's a Cree woman and she lives in Quebec. And she was one of the elders that I visited on my journey. And she was like, listen, you're saying you're out there and you want to do things the old way, like traveling the old way on the land. And I always, when I left, I thought that meant the way I was traveling, like the fact that I was snowshoeing or paddling a canoe. But what I learned was in the old way, in indigenous cultures, it was what you carried in your heart on your journey. It wasn't just the way that you traveled. And they told me, with every step on the land to say, the earth is sacred, the earth is sacred. And with every stroke of my paddle in the canoe to say, the water is sacred, the water is sacred. And they said, that's the old way. And if I traveled in that old way, that I would be safe. And I took the advice, and I'm sitting here before you. So there's something to that, and I share that so that somebody might find that important on their journey as well.
Fantastic. That's a good note to end on. Sacred land, safe back from your long journey of 6 years, 15,534 miles on the Trans-Canada Trail. Dianne Whelan has returned, and we will look for your documentary and your book, and I look forward to meeting you someday in person with a handful of voodoo donuts.
Donuts. Okay. Right on, Ken. Thank you so much.
All right, Dianne, thank you. Dianne Whelan today on Citizen Smith. Fascinating interview, fascinating woman. I hope you enjoyed it. It's got me thinking about hitting the trail. I wouldn't mind a little wilderness. Well, that does it for today's show. Enjoy your day. I will talk to you tomorrow right here at TalkCastPDX.com and Citizen Smith.